Hello, hello, everyone. Giving everyone a chance to join here and connect to the audio and letting in a couple other folks. So bear with us during this lovely phase where everybody is joining this way. I'm going to go ahead and change that. Let other couple of other folks in. This is a lovely awkward phase where you're staring at our faces and we're not saying anything yet. We don't want you to think you're missing anything, but want to give everybody the chance to connect and settle in. Excuse me. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ginny and I'm with Anderson's Bookshops, and we'd like to welcome you to this virtual author event with Laurie Frankel in conversation with Mickey Rowe. We're so glad to have the two of you with us, and all of us, you joining us as participants and attendees. Thank you so much. Just an accessibility note, we have turned on the live transcript feature. So if you'd like subtitles or a full transcript, that is available through the bottom of your screen, the choice down there where it says live transcript, you can turn that on and off. We are also pleased tonight to be joined by Brian Truitt, who you see right now, and Jenny Kamen, who will be providing ASL interpretation tonight, and also Susan Olin, who has graciously agreed to provide the captions. So thank you to the three of you for doing all of that. Slow down briefly, so I know Brian can spell names for us. But to those of you watching, thank you so much for taking the time to keep your eyes on another screen. Obviously, we would all much prefer to be in person, but we'll hopefully this will keep us tied over for a little while longer. We feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel on when we can have in-person events again soon. But in the meantime, we'll be able to chat this way and give everybody a chance to get vaccinated and feel safe and comfortable coming into the stores for in-person events as soon as we can. Just a note for tonight, specifically for those of you who are joining us from our area. Of course, we had that terrible storm last night. Sounds like there were some injuries and quite a bit of destruction, but thankfully I haven't seen reports of any lives lost. So we're thinking of all of you, and I will drop a link in the chat in a little bit of a link to Red Cross, which is collecting donations and is managing some of the cleanup and help for the families affected. So everybody stay safe. Weather in Chicago in the summer, you never know, right? I think it's only like a second thunderstorm we've had all spring and summer, we're in a drought anyway. So it was very crazy to get all of that at once. But anyway, for those of you who aren't familiar with Anderson's, we are an independent bookstore with our two locations in Naperville and Downers Grove. We have been run and owned by the Anderson family for going on 6 generations now. Your support is very personal to us. We appreciate you being here very, very much, and the support of our authors and moderators who help us get through these digital events as well. So thank you. Normally, we would be doing, in before times, as we've been calling it, over 400 events a year. We have lots of other things going on in the meantime until we can get back to that. And a couple other things I would have you check out our website, andersonsbookshop.com. for some other upcoming events, including a couple things just in the next few weeks. Stacey Abrams for her paperback launch this week. Yes, we actually had her last month for her legal thriller, and we're delighted to be a part of her paperback event for her nonfiction book this week as well. Kate Moore, for those of you who enjoyed Radium Girls, speaking of books that have transferred onto the stage, actually, that made that leap as well. And her new book comes out. We'll be hosting her this week. Our local author, Susan Elizabeth Phillips, is launching her new book with us. And actually just announced, which makes my little 80s heart very happy, Richard Marx is coming next month virtually. And there's all kinds of song puns that we're throwing around there about waiting for things, and it's going to be a great time. So do check out our website or follow us on social so you can find the next thing you can join us for. I'll let Brian catch up because I just threw a lot of names. Well done, Brian. Thank you. But today we are so happy to be celebrating the release of 123, Laurie's latest book. So welcome to Laurie and Mickey. I would like to officially introduce them. Laurie, of course, is the New York Times bestselling award-winning author of novels such as The Atlas of Love, Goodbye for Now, and of course, Reese's Book Club pick, This Is How It Always Is. She lives in Seattle with her husband, daughter, and border collie, which I think we should hear more about. And she makes good soup, which is a part of her official biography. So I think we should hear about that too. And Mickey has had a prolific and varied career as an actor, director, and public speaker, now highly sought after both nationally and internationally. He was the epicenter of significant publicity when he became the first autistic actor to play Christopher Boone lead role in the Tony Award-winning play, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, of course, a book as well before it became a stage production. This also made him the first autistic actor to ever play any autistic character in a professional performance setting, which is amazing. He's also appeared as the title role in the Tony Award-winning play Amadeus, and of course, several other things. So hello to both of you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having us. It is
such
absolutely my pleasure.
Yes. Well, I know you have a lot of things to talk about, so I'm going to let you guys have the conversation and take it from here.
Awesome. Laurie, how are you? First off,
I'm so good. I'm so glad to see you, even though it's not, it feels face to face, even though it's not actually quite face to face.
it feels as close to face as any of us have gotten lately.
I think.
But I was so honored to get to read 123 a little bit early. And it is truly, I'm not kidding at all, one of my favorite books that I have read in such a long time. I really loved it so much.
I'm so thrilled. I'm so honored, and I also similarly am trying not to be too much of a geek here because I'm such a fan of yours as well, and I'm tempted to talk theater all night, even though I work on talk books too.
And speaking of theater, I love so much, by the way, while we're geeking out for a second, I love how many little Shakespeare quotes, by the way, you snuck all through 123. My little theater heart was geeking out and loving all of those Shakespeare references and hidden quotes so much.
I'm so glad. I love it when people get them because sometimes I think no one does.
And that's okay too.
And that's okay too. But I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled they work for you. I appreciate
They're like
that.
little Easter eggs.
They are. Absolutely,
Okay.
they are.
So I've tried to think about how to talk about 123 without giving anything away, because there are so many twists and turns that we just keep learning about as we read deeper in the book. And I had such a good experience discovering them and being shocked by them. So I don't want to ruin that for anyone else. But I think it's fair to say that 123 is about triplets, Mab, Monday, and Maribel. And the book really deals with forgiveness and generational blame, generational responsibility, privilege. And then really, I think almost more than anything, it deals with agency, really, and like the agency that we all have to make a difference and to change things, to change our world, to change our environment. Is there anything else that you would say about the book without giving it away in terms of just like summary?
No, I think that's really perfect. And indeed, it's a hard book to talk about without giving things away, which I hope makes it a good read. But it does make it a challenging thing to discuss. Although I have faith that we're going to do a great job. I love that idea that it's agency. I think putting that on the top of your pile is a really lovely read of this.
And then I think the other thing that was so striking really, really immediately to me about the book is just the town of Bourne, this town that is really almost the central character itself, almost. Really one of the biggest characters is this town Bourne, which is a really small town that, for reasons we learn about in the book, really accepts and embraces all of its residents equally, I would say. And one of the big ways that it works to accept everyone and to embrace everyone is accessibility, because many of the residents of Bourne have disabilities. And so the town of Bourne is really universally designed, I would say. Can you talk a little bit about how you created this utopia of a really sort of universally designed world? And maybe I should say, some people might not know what universal design is. So if you want to explain what universal design is, or I can, either way.
Yeah, that's funny because coming into tonight, I thought, which one of us is going to talk about universal design? And the answer, it seems, is both, which is great. Yeah, indeed. This was the idea that I went into this with. The people in this town have been terrifically abused and had a very, very terrible thing happen to them and really continue to happen to them. It is it is not a one-time incident. It is a systemic problem. It is quite terrible in a lot of ways, and it was important to me to acknowledge that, like full stop, new paragraph. It was also really important to me to think about, one, how these people in this small town could come together and support one another, could disagree about fundamental things, but still come together and support each other. And two, to think about ways in which their disabilities and their differences would manifest differently in a town like this than they would in other places. And so in some ways, this is actually a really amazing place to live. It's a really utopic sort of place to live, because they have managed to support everyone. And indeed, as I started thinking about it, what it seemed to me would be the case is that it would be more a universal design principle than a set out to make individual specific things accessible. And those are really, really different ideas. And that is, they're really different ideas in practice, but I guess they're also really different ideas metaphorically. And so for me, it allowed me to show how these people came together to support one another, despite and because of their extraordinary differences.
Yeah, and I think what it also shows so well too, something I say a lot, is that it shows so well that accessibility and universal design helps everyone. And I think like we get that so much more now post-pandemic, where we get to do virtual events like this that are fully accessible.
Right.
But I think about like curb cut. When I'm pushing my kids in a stroller,
Yes.
I'm going to use the curb cut, and the curb cuts, while for a character like Maribel, who uses a wheelchair, those curb cuts might be necessary for her to access the world. They still make my life easier when I'm pushing my stroller. Or the captions we have at the bottom of this video, right, are necessary for deaf and hard of hearing people to watch this video. But if I'm watching a YouTube video in a dentist appointment or in class and I don't want the teacher to know, right? And captions make my life easier as well. So really, I think what this book does so well is it shows that when we make things accessible for other people, we're really helping everyone, including ourselves too.
Yes. Yes. And that's what I love so much about the idea of universal design, is that it helps everybody and it harms nobody. I can't think of anyone whose life is made more difficult by curb cuts at intersections. And so there are many people who are helped. There is nobody whose life is made more difficult. And it is accessibility without necessarily saying like, oh, we have to get together a committee and figure out how to deal with the difficulty that is you, because that's unfortunate. I think this is a much better way of being inclusive, because it also is loving.
Yeah, when you frame disability so well, in that whereas maybe in other towns that aren't born or just other parts of our country, disability might be framed as there is something wrong with this disabled individual, something wrong that needs to be fixed or cured or made whole. But really, in this small town you've created, they really take the social model of disability, where no, actually, there's nothing wrong with any individual person living on this planet. In fact, the thing that maybe needs to be cured is our culture or our environment for not prioritizing making all things equally accessible to all people.
Yes. Yes, it's one of the things that I really love about your work and the way that you frame this, which is that these things are strengths, not weaknesses and not impediments, and certainly not personal defects, but in fact strengths. And this is what we see over the course of this book, is the way in which these three girls, who are very different from one another and navigate the world very differently from one another, in fact come together because of those differences, and that those differences are what allow them to, well, I don't want to give it away, but it allows them to take over the world. This is what is empowering.
Absolutely. So yes, absolutely. And they do all use their specific skill sets and their specific strengths and everything that makes them unique, everything that makes them different. All of those things are required. All three of these sisters needed to be just the exact people who they are to be able to change the world in the exciting way that they change the world.
Yes.
One thing you were talking about how sometimes disability is not the hindrance we think it is, especially for these characters.
Right.
I'm thinking about Maribel specifically right now, that sometimes disability can be a strength, or at least not a hindrance in the way we think it is. And what's popping into my mind right now, that I'm not sure, you wrote it, so you'll know how to talk about it much better than I will. But
Maybe.
Maribel has this incredible, beautiful, amazing soliloquy about love, and then even diverging further than love, even more specifically than that, about sex as well. And so Maribel uses a wheelchair and really has very limited use of her muscles, I would say. She can only speak verbally to others using her AAC device, using like a robotic voice, kind of like your phone might do voice to text or to voice.
Right. Yeah.
But she has this incredible soliloquy about consent and about how she is just as capable of giving and taking consent as anyone else. And even really that there are so many ways and so many reasons in which she is more suited for a fully loving relationship in every definition, physically, mentally, emotionally, than really any of her other sisters who might be more physically able than her.
Yeah, right, exactly. It was really, really important to me going in that she get to do as much as her sisters in every kind of do. That it wasn't just that she was the observer, or it wasn't just that she was traveling by reading or by studying, though indeed she does all of those things. She's very smart. She's a smart one, and I mean they're all smart, but she's the particularly smart one. And so she does those things. But it was important to me that that the fact that she uses a wheelchair and has control over only one arm and hand and needs a machine to speak, to verbally speak, to speak aloud, that she could still do all of the things. And I mean, some of that is that she's a teenage girl, so she's thinking about sex, and she intuits, I think, correctly, that lots of people, particularly people who are reading the book rather than living in this town with her, would assume that she was not ever going to have sex, and that wasn't something that was on the table for her. Never mind love and deep relationships. And so she calls bullshit on that, in a way that I think was, is also very teenagerly. That is, she sort of admits, like, well, I have never had any, so I don't know exactly what it's like. But, I have this sense, and what that soliloquy ends up coming down to is she's saying, like, is it going to be hard to find someone who listens to my needs and really pays attention to what I want and what I don't want and is willing to be patient? Yeah, it's going to be hard to find that person. Is it easy for anyone to find that person? No, that it's impossible for anyone to find that person. This is like the whole human condition, is finding that other person. And so this is her approach to life, and she is at once, I think, very naive and also very right about that, wiser than we are necessarily who are reading about her.
Yeah, it would totally. And I love how you said how smart she is too, because so I'm autistic and I was very late to speak. And so as an autistic person, I know that, like, so often when people think that autistic people can't speak simply because they're not smart enough to speak,
right.
And really our society conjoins those two things so firmly that we use the word dumb and stupid completely interchangeably. Dumb and stupid, we use those words interchangeably, but when you take a second to think more critically about what these words mean, just as deaf means cannot hear and blind means cannot see, dumb means cannot speak. And yeah, and I love that, you know, people are so capable of accepting that someone like Stephen Hawking could be brilliant, even though they use a machine to speak. But for people like Maribel or myself, sometimes people are less quick to bridge that gap and see that just because someone might communicate differently doesn't mean they're less intelligent. And in fact, Maribel, this is not giving anything away, I can say. Maribel, so their mother is a therapist, and Maribel sometimes sits in those therapy appointments, and it's so clear that because Maribel listens and observes, isn't spending her time thinking about what to say next, but instead is just listening and observing, it almost makes her have more to be able to productively contribute.
Yes, yes, indeed. And her mother, as well as a great many of her mother's patients, say to her, "Oh, you should be a therapist," and because you're so good at it. And her reaction is, "Yes, I'm really good at it," and "No, thank you. That's not what I want to do with my life," which again feels very, very much 16. Like she takes for granted that she can do these things. I think as a reader, we're thinking, "Oh, how amazing all that you can do," and she thinks, you know, of course I can do it. And two, I think that a lot of these we're getting used. So, for instance, her voice, which she calls her voice with a capital V, that is this AAC device, is something that we are, all of us, getting much more used to. At first, I was really, when I was first writing the book and thinking about the translation to the audiobook, I was really concerned about how, that translation, because to her sisters it doesn't sound weird at all, but to us it probably would. And now I think, well, that's not true. We have a nav in our car, we have our phones and our devices that we talk to all the time and that talk back to us. We are, all of us, getting really quite used to talking to electronic voices, and so we are, all of us, bridging that gap.
Yeah, so since I'm legally blind, I use large print font. I listen to the audiobook, and it was so brilliantly narrated. First off, the way you handled Maribel's AAC device, and us getting to hear how she speaks to herself and her thoughts as narrator, juxtaposed with her AAC device's voice, her capital V voice, but also because the book is narrated equally by all three sisters, and the audiobook made that so beautiful and enjoyable and cinematic almost to get to be a part of.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I cannot take credit for it. They did a beautiful, beautiful job. When we talked early on about, okay, it's important that there are three narrators. It's important that we get a machine to give us this feeling of Mirabelle's voice. But other than that, they took it, and I mean, actors, man, they just they hired really, really remarkable people and did a really remarkable people plus one machine, and did a beautiful, beautiful job.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
It was so awesome. It is so awesome.
Yeah, I also, just because, so I have kids, and as I think about the world that they might live in the future, you know, the environment is such a big topic in the front of my brain and such a big worry. And I just think so frequently about all the ways in which people will need to advocate for our environment and our future to be able to keep us on the right path and be able to make it so that we can keep just going to Anderson's bookstore in a really easy way if it's not uncomfortable, and that all these things are going to be really accessible to us all in the future. But I really love the journey that the characters take too, in stop me if I say anything I shouldn't, but
No,
I
you're
really
good.
love the journey that the characters take to as they need to advocate for their community, as well as advocating for their environment. And it really starts off, I think, with Maribel, Mab, and Monday's mom really carrying that torch, trying to protect her children, make a future for her children. But there comes a point when that torch is almost passed in a way to the three very young women in this book, three very young women, many of whom are disabled in this book, who really look at the way things have been happening, look at the way people have been advocating through paperwork and the system and all of the slowdowns that can happen when you try to do things on the up and up and according to paperwork and
Right.
laws and legislation.
Right.
But then these three teenagers get to find their own way of making things right, which is, it was just such an exciting part of the book, but also just such like motivation to keep me from feeling helpless in my own future, to remember, you know what, there are always other ways. And when it feels like you are unable to make the change you need to make in the world, you're just not being creative enough. And you got to keep thinking, because there are always other ways to do things.
Yes, yes. That was my fondest hope for this book, that you feel that empowered, and specifically that you think, okay, this didn't work. What are the other ways? And it's true. It's going to be your kids and mine. Like it is the next generation coming up that is going to have to deal with what is a tremendous problem.
Yeah.
These folks have endured extraordinary environmental catastrophe, which is itself due to corporate malfeasance. And the mother, Nora, has indeed been suing for almost 20 years. And she has this moment where people in town are giving her a hard time and basically saying, like, enough, move on. And she's saying, I genuinely do not know whether the appropriate response to this is to continue fighting what is clearly a losing feudal battle for 20 years,
Yeah.
or to just say, oh, well, I guess we got screwed, whatever, and move on. Like, both of those are wrong. Both of those are wrong. Both of those are killing her, basically. And so, indeed, her girls need to take over, and they need to do it on their terms rather than her terms, in part because her terms don't work, in part because that's what teenagers are for. They're to grow up and figure out the way to do it better than you could. And indeed, their way is not their mother's way at all. And it is not within the bounds of the system, which indeed is the legal way, which is often what is held out to us as the hope, is a very limited system, and one that is in many ways frequently part of the problem. And so the fact that has not worked, and the fact that the mother is sort of wed to making it work, both make a lot of sense to me. And that's because I'm her age rather than their age.
Yeah. When also, just because this is I believe, I assume this is a fictional environmental disaster that that they are dealing with, but it is such a like visceral reminder to us all that as we deal with whatever however we might tackle our environmental problems and challenges, it's a reminder that we need all voices and all ideas. We need everyone contributing. And when we only are able to listen to a certain percentage of the population's ideas, or only a certain percentage of the population's voices are listened to, we are cutting ourselves off from possible solution. And we need these young women, these disabled people, all these people who society does not love to say, here's your seat atop the podium, here's your loudspeaker, tell us what to do. They are the voices who in the end come up with a solution, find the way, and it's just a reminder to us that we need everyone's ideas. And what would the world look like right now if all through human history we had women in leadership and people of color making decisions and disabled folks not being put in institutions? Like, we would have so many more ideas now if and we would our world might look more welcoming and universally designed like Born does if we had been accepting ideas from everyone for this whole time.
Yes, yes. I mean, a world of yes, absolutely. Indeed, Mirabelle says in her first chapter, so this is on page like 3-ish of the book, that the teenage girls get ignored and written off, and in fact denigrated, because what she's saying is like, oh, it's just gossip, it's just girls talking about silly things, it doesn't matter. And what she says is, if you're not paying attention to this, then you'll miss it. We're going to take over, and you're not going to be paying attention, and you'll miss it, because in fact, this is the most important thing. And it's true. Women do things differently. Girls do things differently. It was one of the things that I went into this book with. So much changed over the course of drafting, but one of the things I knew going in was it had to be girls, because girls superhero differently. Girls carry as they climb. Girls like listen to each other, and it doesn't necessarily look like strength, but like that's how they get you. That's why it is strength. And I think you're exactly right that there are many things. When I look around the world, I find it to be terrifying and sometimes devastating, particularly when I think about how my kid has to grow up in it. And then I think, look at all of these people who we haven't been listening to. If we were listening to them, if everybody had a seat, if everybody were included and we're talking and we're listening to each other, then the world is a really different place. It isn't even about like, oh, we can change the world. We've already changed. The world is different than we think it is. We just have to listen.
And the people who are changing the world and giving us hope for the environment right now are, I think about Greta Thunberg.
Right.
They're
Yes.
teenage girls with disabilities.
With disabilities, yes.
Right. So it's so awesome.
Who, among other things, have experience navigating the shit that comes downstream. I hesitated to say that while we were changing interpreters. I shouldn't curse in the middle of that, but these things happen. One of the things that I was so torn about with this book is, on the one hand, I wanted it to be really empowering. And on the other hand, I think it's really important to acknowledge the things that happen so far above us and that are sent down, and that we just have to dig ourselves out from under. I think it's really, really important to acknowledge whose fault that is and whose fault it isn't. I think so often empowerment is offered to us as a way to get people off the hook upstream. And so I thought it was very important to balance those things. And so, I think that some of what we're seeing from these activists, teenage activists, disabled teenage activists, is that they are people who are used to navigating the world that is not welcoming and that is not built for them, and that they have to say, hey, listen, I do know what I'm talking about. I do have important ideas here. And that those skills are the skills that the world needs now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I often say, so 85% of college graduate, this is a real life statistic, not a statistic from the book, but in real life, 85% of college graduates on the autism spectrum are unemployed, which is so
heartbreaking.
Thank you for giving me that word. But what I always say is exactly what you just said, which is that, I think people with disabilities are truly some of the best creative problem solvers in the world, because we've been having to creatively problem solve our entire lives to navigate a world that was not built for us.
Yes. And I find that extraordinarily inspiring, but also, I mean, I guess I'm back to heartbreaking. It kills me a little bit that all of these people and the resources that they bring are being ignored when they could be solving these problems.
Well, I'm just so glad that this book gives such like a clear demonstration to the world and to everyone who reads it that that yes we can do this. That people who you might not think are capable are so much more capable than you think, that young women are capable and fierce fighters. That it makes me think there's this line in the book. You know what, since I listened to the audiobook, it is so hard to highlight specific lines and pull text from. So feel free to, if you have the book or know the line, to give it to me better. But basically, this line is, and I don't know I forget which of the three sisters this is talking, but it's a line about lambs and wolves. And it's that, let me see what I wrote in my note about it. Oh yeah, so one of the sisters is really angry at this point, and even almost as angry, it seemed to me, she's almost as angry as she is at these people who have caused this real destruction in their life for the destruction they've caused. She's also angry that they see her as a lamb and they don't realize what a wolf she is.
Yeah.
And she's so frustrated that even though she is trying to tear them down, and she knows she will be successful at tearing them down because she's not going to stop until she does, they don't even care because they see so little in her that they think she's a lamb when really she's a wolf.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, they all three have variations on that idea, and really the whole town is a manifestation of this idea. A thing that they point out over and over is it isn't a coincidence that this town was downstream from this chemical plant and their water polluted and their soil polluted. That is by design. That's why they built a plant there, is because it's a town that they thought could not object strenuously enough. Because they were already poor, because they were already voiceless. And
they were already told to accept their circumstances and not expect anything different. It's where some people get to be happy,
right,
and some people get to be happy maybe for brief moments while fighting like heck or the rest of the time.
Yes, yes. And that also is Maribel's point, is that it's not so much that some people are happy and some people are not happy. It's that we expect some people to be happy and we expect other people not to be happy. That, she's saying, like, because I cannot speak out loud, because I use a wheelchair, because I have control over only one limb, the assumption is that I won't be happy, and that's okay with everybody. And that's what she objects to. She isn't unhappy, but mostly she objects to the assumption that she is, and the decision of the world at large. They're like, well, what do you expect?
Of course she is.
Of course
we wouldn't expect anything else. Yeah. We would be unhappy if we were in her position. So it's just the way of the world.
It's just the way of the world. You drew the short straw. So of course you're unhappy, and fair enough. There's nothing that can be done about that. And indeed, that is enraging for her, and me too. I am also enraged.
Yeah. What's your favorite part of the book? What aspect of the book are you so excited for readers to read and respond to?
I love the ending, and this is always true. I always love the ending. I feel like I don't write it so much as kind of find it along the way. It reveals itself, which is very exciting. And I really love the ending. It's all of the stuff that we've been talking about. I love the way these girls come together. I love the way in which they each contribute the thing that they must to what happens at the end. But unfortunately, it's an impossible thing to talk about on book tour because the book only came out last week, so it's not fair to ruin the ending for everyone.
No, definitely not fair. I also, though, love, just between you and me, that at the very, very, very ending, we almost get two options for that ending. We get to see two little peeks at different aspects of the future of Bourne. And I love that we get those options of getting to getting both of those beautiful gifts that you gave us at the end of the book?
Well, because it is a book in many ways about options, about different ways that you might do things. This way that you've thought about might be, and the way that you think is the answer and is the only way and is the only option. Maybe it is, or if you looked at it differently, maybe there would be another option. So I like to offer it to you.
Liked it a lot.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's see. I see 3 things in the chat here.
Okay.
Let's open that up really quick. Oh, you know what?
Tell me.
I don't know. I can't quite see it, but
okay, hold on.
I think it's instructions to people.
They're just
yeah,
they're instructions for me, guys. So.
Oh. That's funny. You know what? I can't quite see them either. They have very small. Okay, yeah, they're not questions. Okay, but if anybody has questions, we'd happily answer them.
Yeah, we're ready for any questions that anybody has. Got somebody here. I just love the characters from Danielle. I just love the characters. Laurie, did you hear the girls' different voices as you were writing?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that question. Yeah, always. And not at the beginning. At the beginning, they all sounded alike, and they all sounded like me. So that was no good at all. And as I edited and edited and edited and edited and did more editing, their voices eventually come through, and then they start speaking for themselves rather than my having to speak for them, which is really lovely. As they became different characters, it was easier to hear their voices. They really are very different girls, and so they speak very differently from one another, and that made them easier to write and easier to to tune that frequency in, I guess, so that I could hear how each of them might talk. Mab is trying to get into college, and she's taking the SATs, and so her vocabulary is somewhat better than mine is anymore, because it's been a long time since I took the SATs. But otherwise, it was just very interesting to negotiate all of their different ways that they used language, and to look up lots of big words. It's good for me.
How did you? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Mickey.
So how did you do your research for this book? Because obviously, like, the environmental disaster part of the book, I feel like we are all well too educated on, unfortunately. And I feel like there are so many news stories where we can get so much information from. But in terms of the voices of, because you got disability so right. I'm a disability activist, and you got disability so right in this book. So right. And especially now, as I'm on social media and see all these young women on TikTok and Instagram who are disabled activists and young environmental activists changing the world, you so encompassed that and you got all of that so right and so accurately. Were there real life people who you were sort of channeling or looking to in that research process?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for saying that. It means the world to me. And second of all, yeah, I was panicked about making sure I was getting that right from conception of this book, and then for the 3.5 years it took me to finish it. So I did tons and tons of research and talked to lots and lots of people, and read a lot, which is my default position in life, is to be reading a lot. And so that helped. It was a funny book to research, because as much as I wanted them to have these disabilities and to have to negotiate these disabilities, so much about the way that they live, the other ways they live, because of the town that they live in, made the research that I was doing
No.
right, or like off a little bit. And some of it was that I was trying to move them off. So it was important to me that they not quite be diagnosable, that you could not say like, oh, and she had blank. So that was really important, and that meant doing research and then changing it, basically changing it up, to make sure that it wasn't too much of one thing or too little of another thing. And two, to think about what diagnosis means, and what being in the world means if you don't need a label to get medical care, if you don't need a label to get insurance, if you don't need a label to make sure that you are getting education services, and they don't in this town, and therefore their lives are really different than, because they're pretend, than people who I was researching who live in the real world.
When it's so complicated, but what's so humane about that is that you talk about these people not in terms of what is wrong with them, in quotes,
right,
or what what their specific diagnosis is, but you talk about these people in terms of, oh, this is so-and-so, and they really benefit from the use of ramps, or this is so-and-so, and they really benefit from XYZ accommodation, which is just such a humanizing way to talk about it. And also it goes back to that, the way of talking about disability that we mentioned at the very beginning, about how it's really about the culture and the environment more than the individual, that for instance, being deaf might not be a disability on this call because we have interpreters. So, if without the interpreters, we would be at just as much a lot. We would be at a loss because we can't understand sign language as well as we should. And the deaf people would be at a loss because they couldn't understand us. But when we have those accommodations there, everyone's on more equal playing field, and the disability kind of falls away.
Right. It becomes,
which just shows that it's all about the environment. The
right.
disability is a
right. It is literally less disabling. And it was, what I want to say about it is that obviously it's different when it's not such a small town, and when it's not fiction, and you have to deal with policy, and you have to deal with politicians, and you have to raise money and taxing, and all of this stuff. But I was worried when I started the book that it was going to come off really preachy and didactic, and in fact it was so easy to write it this way. It just comes off as character. It did not feel to me like, oh, I am making this big point. And yeah, it makes the writing a little bit awkward, but it's worth it because I'm making this big point. In fact, it was the easiest way to talk about character. Of course, these girls aren't going to introduce themselves with like, hello, it's nice to meet you. This is my name and here is my diagnosis. Like, people don't talk like that. Of course, they're not going to do that. They're not going to lead with their symptoms. They're going to lead with their characters. They're going to lead with their humanity. And that was the easiest way to write them.
And it made it more of an adventure and a thriller. And it's not, you aren't ever lecturing us, I feel like. You're presenting us with obstacles, environmental obstacles that the heroes, these characters, need to overcome to be able to achieve all the goals that they need to. And like, what better hero's journey is there than that, to give us all these obstacles? And each character has their own little tools and abilities, and that we need them all to be heroes in their own way to overcome this.
Right.
Yeah,
because
it's not that message with a capital M, right? Like,
yes. We also call that plot. That's what we call that.
Ideally. And then I see a message here from Kelly.
Yes, I was just going to say, this is a great question too. Do you want me to go ahead and read that, Mickey?
Sure.
As an author, was this idea of a book born in your brain before you finished the last book? And there's a second half question that is interesting too, but let's go ahead and talk about that one, especially considering the big level success of your previous book, Laurie. What was that like then coming onto this one?
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting that question. And it's such a good question, and it's one that I don't necessarily know the answer to. At what point this idea was in my brain in its current state. But the short answer is yes. I was working on this book before I finished the last book. I'm always working on the next book. when the previous book comes out. Books are in production for like a year and a half out of my hands and in somebody else's, and I think I would lose my mind if I were not writing the next book. And plus, I'm not a fast writer, unfortunately, and actually I'm a very fast writer. It's just that it needs a lot of editing, and editing is not a fast process. And therefore, it's important for me to. Otherwise, it would take me 10 years between books if I weren't starting the next one. When I was writing the last one, I have been just, so grateful for all of the people who read my previous book. This Is How It Always Is. I think that you never take for granted that. I know that my mother is going to read the book, and I never take for granted that anyone else is going to. And so I have been so grateful for that. But then also, I don't want to disappoint people. So I have had so much kindness funneled to me from people who say, "Oh, I loved that book so much," and I want them to be happy. So I want them to love this book too. And they were on my mind when I was writing this book.
That's interesting for both of you then. Question, Laurie, sorry. How much do you write, considering your, work history as well, and Mickey, you as well, how much is the art for yourself and how much is the art for the audience?
Yeah, it's a particularly interesting question for Mickey because theater is so collaborative at conception, whereas this thing like lives in my brain and my brain alone for years at a time before it goes out and gets other people involved. That isn't true of theater.
Yeah, I feel like, so if the question is how much is it for yourself and how much is it for other people, I think what's so interesting, because it's such a different thing than writing a book, because you come in and the story is already written. I saw Mark Haddon was Instagram messaging you earlier today, who wrote Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. But so really my job is not to come up with the story. I really have very limited ability to change the story. My only job is to bring as much of my humanity as I possibly can to the character, to help bring the character to life. But it's so interesting because sometimes you as an actor, you can almost, if you make it too much about yourself or you get too attached, you're not giving the audience the freedom to finish the story in their head. And I almost feel like sometimes you need to, as an actor, you want to have as much specificity as you possibly can in terms of everything going on in your head. And you really want to bring I kind of make a Venn diagram where here's everything I know about the character. Here's everything I know about myself. And I try as hard as possible to move as many pieces as I can into the middle, because all those things in the middle, those are all the true pieces of who I am in my soul that I can bring to the character, that are going to bring life to the character that someone else has written. So you want as much specificity as you possibly can have, but you also want to leave a little bit of empty room in there, almost like you're an empty vessel for the audience's experience. Because in the end, it's not about you. And if you fill the whole character up too much with all your thoughts and feelings and therapy almost, then there's nothing left for the audience. So you really have to kind of have some sort of a line drawn there where you allow space for it to be the audience's character, not yours. And you need to leave enough room there for the audience to finish the story, to project and finish the story, whatever they are going to layer onto that.
Okay.
I can't wait to go back to live theater.
Yes, this is definitely making me think about that too. Do you have a date, Mickey, that you have to be on stage there for anything?
I do and I don't. I have something really exciting coming up in January in New Year. But yeah, nothing's coming soon enough.
All right. Yes, yes, yes. Well, we can't wait to hear whenever that is. I know that there are some places say September for other stage
They
and other
are.
Broadway, right?
I think most of Broadway is opening back up in the fall, which is
Yeah.
so exciting. And I can't wait to see what that looks like now. But yeah, so it's just so important. I think we have been so isolated. We've been so completely isolated for over a year and a half almost. And what a difficult year and a half it has been, even beyond the isolation. There has been so much that we've all been dealing with as a community, as a global community, and this year and a half. And I think we are so ready, and it is so time for us to be able to come together over stories and be able to discuss everything we've been through and all the ways in which we would like the future to look now, through stories, through going to plays, through reading books like 1, 2, 3, and then going to Anderson's to talk to other people.
Mickey, you are checking all the boxes. I love it. I love it. Well done. I do want to ask the second part of Kelly's question, although it's backtracking a tiny bit, because I think it's really interesting as well, is for Laurie, did the book start about sisters? Did it start about bad environmentalism, or did it start about disabilities?
Yeah, and it's such a good question, and they all three happened at the same time. They were all part of the story. They came as one, which is, I guess, to say that once so what I kept thinking about as I started to read about environmental disasters like this one, all of the articles that say long-term health consequences, and I thought, well, what are long-term health consequences? And of course, the news articles don't tell you, because they're news articles. They're not long-term. They're not 20 years later. They're right now. So that's the first thing I started looking into and thinking about. What is long-term health consequences, and for an entire town of long-term health consequences look like? And so those two things really happened together for me. And then it was just a question of wanting to look at as wide a swath of people affected by this as I could, and yet they have to fit into a novel, and that novel probably can't be 1,000 pages long, and it also you have to be able to keep track of everybody, and you probably wouldn't have super believed it if I told you that Nora had gotten pregnant with 7 babies, even though I like to look at lots of characters. So triplets, that was like my max there. How to do everything I needed to do, and still fit it into book form. So indeed, sometimes those pieces come separately. Sometimes significant pieces come really late in the writing process, but those 3 things were all of a piece. They all came together.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, one of the things I loved about this conversation is that it reminds me of, now that, as you say, Mickey, now that we are going to be able to go back into the world a little bit and interacting with each other in a way that we haven't, as a retail worker, my hope is that people have not forgotten how to interact a little bit. But I've been reading some things too on people that have been so isolated and have not been forced to exercise their ability, their empathy, essentially, right, face to face. But I think thinking about this conversation, it reminds you that when we are back face to face, that not everybody handles everything the same way, whether that be through something that others would see as a disability, whether that be just a different worldview, right? Or both, or combination of those things. And I think that's going to be a very interesting lesson that I hope is expressed through various art forms as we go down the road here, and how performance and writing is going to handle 2020 and 2021, and what that looks like in art going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And I do hope that one of the things we have learned in what has been a very difficult year is leading with empathy. I feel like if we have learned nothing this year, it must be that the power of community, and what happens when we can be together, and the way in which the world is big, and people negotiate it and navigate it differently because they're very different people, and yet it is necessary to think of one another, to be empathetic, um, because otherwise you get years like this one. It was really, really, really hard, and I think we will come out. I hope we will come out of it like leading with love, as cheesy as that sounds.
No, I think that's an excellent goal for all of us. Before we go, I'm sitting here admiring both of your bookshelves because I'm a book person and that's what I do. And I'm spying on Mickey's, though I really want to know what the sign behind your head says, Mickey, because you're big centered. Yes. Okay. That was my suspicion. Be kind. Think critically. I love it.
I do too. I also love the Shakespeare.
I was going to say, that's what I can see.
Riverside.
I have to say, one of the characters in your book, Laurie, does magic. One of the people who come into the town, it just, and it's not a big part of the story, but just a little funny thing about him that comes up now and then. And these are all magic books because I am obsessed with magic. Magic is my special interest. So this is like an encyclopedia that is out of, I think it's been out of print for a while, of like all the magic tricks.
Wow.
And how to do them. It's always
amazing.
It's amazing.
You were looking at the bookshelf.
Well, you know, I'm a book person. That's kind of my thing.
Well, and the top hat also.
Yes.
Your background
both of them
A for sure.
Aren't there two? There's
I juggle a lot. So there's a top hat, and then there's like a hat that you can juggle and flip around and do tricks with.
Just stop now. That's just amazing.
I can't. Yeah, I'm wildly impressed. You definitely get an A for your background.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask then, obviously books in your homes, which of course is wonderful and does not surprise me in the least, but what are both of you reading right now? Anything that you would like to, that you've been loving, that you want to share, or just something that's impacted you greatly during this lovely time of quarantine?
Yeah, I mean, just things I can reach right now.
Sure.
Seeing the length of my earbuds here. Okay, this is the book I'm recommending to everybody of late.
Yes, Becky Anderson, the owner of our store, was just raving about this book.
Oh, it's real. Okay, so hold on.
I'm gonna find the link.
No, that book.
We also loved Charlotte's first book.
Yes. Okay.
Migration.
So I brought props. Okay. I just unfortunately couldn't reach them. So Migrations, loved this book. Loved it. And then her new book is this one. This comes out in August. Once There Were Wolves.
There we go.
So it's good for pre-ordering right now.
Yes. I just dropped the link in the chat.
And then it will come to you and you will be so happy. But in the meantime, you could read Migrations, which is her previous one. I also want to shout out, since we're talking, and since I did chit chat with Mark Hayden earlier today, The Porpoise, which I loved this book. It is so different from Curious Incident that you wouldn't necessarily believe that it is by the same person, which is actually one of the things that I really look for in authors. I want every book to be different because I don't know what I'm in for. This book actually, at every time I turned the page, I was in for something that I wasn't expecting, and huge Shakespearean references throughout. In fact, like the whole arc of it is really, I don't want to ruin it, but it is very Shakespeare. Loved this book.
Yay.
I also have this one. Beautiful book.
Oh yes, Lovers.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
so
amazing.
I just finished listening to 1, 2, 3, maybe a week ago. And then since then, I have an hour-long, 2-hour-long bus ride commute to work. And so I've been trying to get going on other audiobooks in this week since I finished 1, 2, 3, but none of them are as good. And they're just like, so after listening to an audiobook that is as good as 1, 2, 3, all of the others are so disappointing that I've been switching. I've been like going 2 hours in and then trying to start another one, and then going 2 hours in and trying to start another one. So I don't have my next book yet picked out, but I've been working on my book a lot this week.
I was going to say, yours is next March, right?
March, yes.
Yay.
Different. And so we've been going back and forth all week, and I just this morning got the cover art emailed to me, which is super, super exciting. to have gotten that in my email inbox this morning.
Congratulations. That's a huge moment.
Absolutely. Far enough out that I don't even have a link to send to everybody yet.
It was a very scary email to open, but it is so excited for you guys to get to see the cover as soon as I'm allowed. I don't know if I'm allowed to post it yet. I'm waiting on the official okay.
Yes, I don't even have a title. Like it's not even in our database from Ingram as of yet. So we'll look forward to that for next year. Absolutely. And by then we should be able to be in person, right? So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Absolutely. Well, I just want to mention too, if you are into audiobooks, for those of you listening, if you're not familiar with Libro.fm, that is a fantastic place to get audiobooks, partially because it does benefit independent bookstores. So if you are an audiobook listener, that is an option for you if you didn't previously know it. Well, I think we are. Yes, we really like them.
Yeah,
they're lovely to work with. Very helpful on our end too. So we appreciate them quite a bit. We are through the questions we had in the chat. So I do want to thank Brian and Jenny and Susan for all of their help tonight. Let her spell that. And yes, thank you, Mickey and Laurie, for being with us and sharing this really fascinating conversation. We really, really appreciate it. And I know those of you who already purchased copies of the book, they will be available soon. I will send you an email when they are ready, but they're signed. Thank you, Laurie. Yay. And I'll put a link again. I sent one earlier too, that if you haven't yet ordered your signed copy, or maybe you need another one because they do make excellent gifts, you can order one from Anderson's right there. We do ship anywhere in the US. We've got that. Mickey, I can't wait to hear more about your book next year. And a little birdie who happens to be Laurie's publicist also mentioned that she's also your publicist. So I think we're going to have a chat and we'll figure it out. And maybe Laurie will come moderate an event with you.
I would be delighted.
Yes. Well, thank you all for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us. This has been really great.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Congratulations in the book. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. Stay safe out there.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.